So, welcome to What is Worship? This is my friend Suze Courtney in Manchester. I'm Harmony. We're excited to have a conversation about worship. We love talking about worship, don't we, Suze? We, we've had lots of undocumented conversations about worship. So, we'll be on our best behavior, but we'll still be authentic in our thoughts and opinions, no doubt. But Suze, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to get to have a little bit of a chat and hear your heart for worship, for people. Before we do all of that good stuff, please tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What does your
Right.
life look like?
So I am 39. Not that that really makes much difference.
I love that you started with that.
Oh, why not?
That's
Let's
brilliant.
let's already shatter the myth that you have to stop doing worship at a certain age. Let's just get that one
Okay.
out.
Okay,
Off
well,
the
I'm 44. In that vein, I'll just put it out there. I'm 44. Right, carry on.
Okay, so I have two kids who are now 14 and 10. I go to Manchester Vineyard, which we moved up to Manchester from Reading 5 years ago to be part of starting the church with Paul and Steph Lowe, who are fantastic humans. Um, as so, I'm now a worship pastor along with my husband Andrew, who,
Yay.
if you've met him, is
Hmm.
the better half of the two of us. He's a social
Well,
worker. He works in adoption, but he just finished working in child protection. So child protection during the pandemic was interesting,
wow.
awful, and yeah, and I have a full-time job, which is I work for BBC for a magnificent radio station called BBC Radio 5 Live, and my title there is I'm a broadcast journalist. So I make radio, I write scripts, I book guests. Sometimes I'm on the radio, but mostly I am getting a program ready. So it's
Mm.
tight turnarounds. At the moment, I work on the late team. So that means my shifts normally start 2 or 5 and finish at 1 or 5 in the morning. And we start with an empty run order and we got to fill it up. So that's kind of what
Oh,
my job looks like. It's calling MPs, spokespeople, it's writing scripts, it's editing, it's yeah, all of that really. So it's been full on. It's always full on, but it's been very full on over the last 18 months.
and you're just off of a night shift, which I was marveling at how composed and alert and with it you are after only 4 hours sleep. And here you go again, right back at it.
Yeah,
So that's
I honestly
amazing.
think God made me to exist on not much sleep. Because I used to work on breakfast shows when the kids were very small, so sometimes that was 2 hours sleep, and then an alarm at 4:45. So
That is
there's a lot of makeup going on here, Harmony. Cover up the bags.
another thing that you're not supposed to say, right? You're not supposed to talk about these things. This is amazing. I wonder what else you're going to say in the next hour or so.
It's
Um,
okay. This is only peppermint tea, so we're fine.
that's so great. Well, you look amazing. You are amazing. And I think it's incredible the job that you get to do and some of the spaces that you get to occupy, conversations that you get to be a part of, the people that you get to hang around with. It's very different than your worship pastor job. But I think all the things that you do, including being a mom and a wife, you're just a very interesting person. There's so many different conversations that we could have. But there's one other thing I wanted to touch on in terms of your story as well, and that is the X Factor thing.
Yeah.
So, since we're talking about our age and whether or not we wear makeup, let's talk about X Factor.
Yeah. Now I hate to do this because I hate it when guests do this on the radio, but it was actually Pop Idol.
Pop Idol. Well,
Which, if you're an expert in UK culture, pop culture, you know there's a difference.
there is a
So
difference.
the first Pop Idol was won by Will Young, And it was
Uh-huh.
all about Will Young versus Gareth Gates, and it was the first time that Simon Cowell entered into our lives. And then I was part of the second series of that way back in 2003, just after I'd finished my degree. So I'd watched the first series and I'd always wanted to know if I could actually sing. So I watched it with my housemates and I slagged everybody off because I wasn't very mature back then. Harmony, I was only, 20. And I was like, they're rubbish. She can't sing. And they were like, well, you do it then. So I applied
That's
and then
amazing.
I auditioned the first day after the day after my last exam at university, which was a wild ride.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Well, the audition came through because you just back then you wrote a letter,
Mhm.
and you just said I'd quite like to do this thing, and then they just come to these open auditions. I got there, and there's like thousands of people, and everyone's brought their mum or their boyfriend, and I'm just there with a book, thinking, what have I done?
Oh,
Um,
brilliant.
But so the judging panel, if anyone's racking their brains, was Simon Cowell, Pete Waterman of Kylie fame, Dr. Fox, and oh gosh, Nicky Chapman, who was another sort of pop factory person back in the day, and it was hosted by Anne to Deck. And to cut a long story short, I came fifth, so it took pretty much the whole of my first year after uni. So that took me all the way up till Christmas, and then we did a tour and a very terrible Christmas album available in all good charity shops.
I'm gonna look out for that when I'm in a charity shop next. So, okay, so many questions about that,
Okay,
about what
yeah,
that was like, but maybe
so many
maybe
questions.
the most, yes, the most pressing one on my mind right now is what did you learn about yourself from that experience?
So I had a really tough experience doing the show. I mean, it was completely wild back then. It was watched by I think something like 12 million people. So you go from just being a normal human, well, you still are the same human, to suddenly people react very differently around you. Um, what was really difficult for me was my life had all been about my brain up till then. So I grew up on a farm, hated growing up in Devon, couldn't cope with it. Like I didn't know, but I needed people and
Hmm.
a mix of people, and it was just this suffocating thing. So at about 8 or maybe even younger, I was like, I'm going to university. So my whole life had been about I loved literature, and it was all about getting away, and then suddenly everyone looked at me through the lens of being a singer, and I didn't deal with that brilliantly. To be honest, I found that really really difficult because I was like, I'm still the same, you know, and I've always sung. It's just now I'm singing to a camera, and not
Hmm.
even that well half the time.
Hmm.
So that was really difficult. And then I think the other thing was I had loads of untrue stories planted about me in papers
Did
saying,
you?
yeah, saying that I called, bullied people because of their weight, which is ironic if you know my story around weight, that I wouldn't sign autographs, that I was a diva, all sorts of horrible. They approached every boyfriend I'd had, uh, yeah, and offered them quite a lot of money. None of them spoke. So good judge of character. I learned that I'm a good judge of character.
That's
Um,
crazy.
People who bullied me from school came out of the woodwork and said, "Well, she wasn't like this at school. She was really fat and she was really this." And so I remember vividly being in Starbucks in Reading, which is where I lived at the time, and watching someone read something untrue about me and then spotting me and doing this. And it was just like, huh. you know, it's the worst.
That's
And so there was
horrendous.
like this campaign of bad stories about me, and then I left the program because obviously it's a voting thing. So the narrative was like she's not like she appears. She's actually it's all an elaborate act. Which, if anybody knows me, I'm far too tired to
Wow.
ever act.
Wow.
So that was really hard to deal with because there was a level of unfairness
Mhm.
about it, because you can't set the record straight. I mean, the big week it broke. I think I was on every page three of all the tabloids. So like the Sun, the Mail, the Mirror, the Express.
That's
Um,
unreal.
yeah, so that was really difficult.
Is that how you saw your life going?
Huh?
Is that how you saw your life going?
No, no.
That's
I only
unreal.
did it, and you will believe me because you know me, but at the time people didn't really. I just wanted to know if I could sing,
Mm.
because when you grow up, you sing in school and you sing in church, and people say nice things to you, and your family say you're all right. But I wanted to know objective.
Mhm.
Actually, thinking about it, objectively knowing something is important to me. So I just thought, well, if I go and I sing in front of four people who don't know me, they'll just tell me the truth and then I'll know. But I hadn't stupidly thought what happens if.
If you could actually sing and you weren't
Yeah,
actually
so
really
I was
good.
like, I'll get to the top 100, like maybe, and then that'll be it. And I'll be like, right, well, I can sing a bit, good. And I didn't really think it would like keep going and keep going. Yeah, so that was a very weird thing to have spent your entire life thinking about cerebral things and
Mhm.
what you wanted to do. I've always wanted to work in journalism, always. I wanted to work for papers, which changed after that experience because I just thought, no, can't do that.
Wow.
Um, and then, yeah, 21, freshly spat out of a reality TV show, can't go anywhere without people following you, wanting your autograph. Or on one occasion, some girls were like, just like, can I just follow you around, like, see where you're shopping? And I was like, yeah, but you can't come in the changing room. Like, so yeah, that was wild. And it was like not really the plan and was hard for a long time because,
Yeah,
you're very recognizable for a while until you're not
that is
anymore.
wild. I didn't realize that you'd had all that negative press. I knew you did well in it, and I know that you can sing not because of Pop Idol, but because of other spaces. Um, but I imagine as a 21-year-old, that must have been really difficult to come through the other side of all that negative press. So, how did you do that?
I think uh, probably part of the reason there was negative press in the first place was because I just refused to buy into the hype of it all. I just the whole way through it kept a very firm grip on reality, actual reality, which is, I mean, I'm still completely the same person, and at best, I'm all right at singing.
Mm.
You know,
Oh,
I
come
am.
on.
I no, but like, there's Ariana Grande in the world. Like all we've actually done is sing for like. If you added all the singing together, it was only about 10 minutes. So I kept a really good grasp of that. Um, and because of growing up in the countryside in the middle of nowhere, my faith has never been mediated through a person. It's never gone through a youth leader or my faith has always been me and God in my room.
Mm.
So that still works when you are doing a mad thing, because he was just as available to me as ever.
Mm.
So yeah, I couldn't go to church for a while, but he was there, you know. So I think the worst thing you can do as a Christian is be very pleased with yourself. You know, not that we should be worms. You know, Jesus
Mm.
died for us, and we are raised. You know, we are raised with Him, and we share in all of that. But to suddenly think that you're a big deal is dangerous,
Mm.
dangerous territory. And I had loads of friends who took the mickey out of me. And I'd just met Andrew, who's now my husband.
Mm.
So I remember him posting. We were living in this 3, 4 story house in Regent's Park. It's probably not, wasn't Regent's Park actually, near London Zoo, around there. Massive white house, had a grand piano, uh, uh, you know, all the contestants together. And
Mm.
he snuck this little care package with Hold On, the album Hold On, um,
Oh.
through the door. And I remember like going up to my room and sticking it in the CD player. Remember those? And just like having the most amazing time of worship, just me and God. And
Mm.
you know, that song was really important to me. My times are in your hands. I know I'll never understand, but I'll trust in you. I
Mm.
think that was very important. And yeah, I had great friends who just kept on telling me I was an idiot.
Oh, bless them.
And making fun of me, but it was really important because it took the sting out. You
Mm.
know, like who cares what other people think? And you know, I think it has informed where I work. I work for BBC because despite what many people think, one of the first questions we always ask is, "This is a great story if it's true." You know,
Mm.
um, have we gone to so and so? Do we know that this is actually the truth? We're really careful with that. Um, yeah, there's we have like certain rules about what stories can be run and not run because it can be exciting to get a really juicy story, but if it's not true, you don't
Mm.
run it. You know, so yeah, I think it's probably informed lots of my life, but it was hard, and it was a lot of tears. Um, it was really hard. Having people believe lies about you is hard. Um, yeah,
Especially so publicly. It's one thing for, somebody in your everyday life to accuse you of something, but for all of the tabloid papers in the country to be writing something about you, that's on a whole different level. And I find it so fascinating that you still ended up in journalism after
mm,
all of that. It's such
yeah,
an interesting thing, and probably the formation that went on in you and the things that you learned from that horrible experience. I'm sure that must have shaped how you do your job of being a journalist today.
yeah. I mean, somebody once said to me, and I didn't really know how to reply to them. Well, how can you justify being a journalist? Wobbly headed. They're often wobbly headed with those sort of questions. And I was like, and I was genuinely baffled because I was like, what do you mean? You know, you know, and I knew what they meant actually. I was just being a little provocative because a proper journalist is about getting getting true things out there. You know, if we look at the stories of what's happened in Afghanistan over the last few months, you know, I worked those weekends with the airlift, and we were getting messages from people in Afghanistan just saying, can you help? You know, can you do anything? Can you? And the only thing we could do is say, like, we can get you on the radio, we can
Mm.
change your name, you know. I'm just talking about truth. We tell people when we change names. Um,
Thank you
we
for clarifying.
yeah. We always say this is, you know, an alias because obviously it's people's safety concerns. But
Mm.
imagine if there'd been no coverage of what was going on in Afghanistan, we wouldn't have a clue
Mm.
about what happened there.
Right.
Um, and even now, I was reading a thread on Twitter yesterday that was a prominent former now Afghan journalist saying, reply with what you used to do, when you were free, was how he had phrased it. And then
Wow.
underneath it was all these people saying, well, I was studying for a master's and now I'm at home.
Mm.
Women, particularly, or I was a journalist and now I'm a refugee.
Mm.
So, you know, I, I know there'll be people who watch this and have opinions about the BBC. In my experience, we do our very, very best, and I've been working there for 17 years, to in very different newsrooms as well, to 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 fact check things, to go back to the source, to check with people, um, and you develop a gut, about what is true and what's not. So I think that's not at odds with Christianity in any way. You know, dealing dealing in truth is, and
Mhm.
people's stories,
Mhm.
is really important, and dealing with it well. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
sometimes we'll get someone who's sharing something, and it's part of my job to sort of talk them through what the ramifications might be of them sharing something,
Mm.
and essentially sometimes just dissuade them, like, do you know, if you talk about this and this, these could be the sort of knock-ons. um but people find that sharing is such an important part of healing sometimes, and getting things out into the open, isn't it?
Mhm.
Things have so much more power when they are locked down and
Mhm.
in shame and shadow. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean, all of that to say, I love my job.
I
I'm not a
love.
rookie now. It's cracking on for 20 years of doing it. So um, it's, I was working the night of when the Manchester bomb happened,
Mm.
working all the way through COVID in the office, hearing people's stories of watching people die on Zoom, FaceTime,
Mhm.
watching people die through glass, men ringing up because they've lost their wife of 60 years. Hearing those stories, it's a real privilege, and it needs people who care about people to do
Mm.
the job. So
Mm.
yeah, I love it. I love it.
So from pop idol, I'll get it
Oh,
right this time, pop idol to journalist to worship pastor. I mean, that journey totally makes sense, right?
yeah. Um, it does make sense, really. So I grew up in Methodism
Mhm.
on a farm in Devon, in the middle of nowhere. So I grew up in Methodism, going to chapel every Sunday, and even as young as I can remember, I loved the hymns. Not all of them; some of them are rubbish, but the good ones.
Mhm.
So I would even say now that I would sense the Holy Spirit on certain songs, as as a kid. And then at about 11, we started going to Spring Harvest, and experienced worship en masse with people my age.
Mm.
And I was just like, oh, this is amazing. And we had I was very earnest. We had a little worship band. I think my dad spent like 2 grand on some stands and some speakers and a little 8 channel mixing desk. And like my friend Ben would mix it, and it was all very, and even back then I was like, take this seriously. We're worshiping the Lord.
Oh, I can imagine that.
And then, once a month we'd pin the church to their seats and like do our worship bit. Um, so it's all, it's always it's always been there. Um, I'm wary of, I can talk, so I'm wary of saying too much, but sort of in the 90s, there was some great music around. Um, and I wasn't listening to a lot of Christian stuff at all. I wasn't interested in Christian subculture. I'm still not interested in Christian subculture. Um, and so I was listening to bands like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you had like Blur and Oasis, but like Elastica and Skunk Nancy and Alanis Morissette, and interested in songs that like got you in the hook.
Mm-hmm.
And all the sort of Christian bands that were coming from America, I was like, ugh, this is terrible and cheesy and awful. And so I just wasn't interested at all. And then I went I went to uni. I didn't do church for a bit. And then I started going to a church, and I promised the Lord I would go. I'd done that thing that I never had done before, of saying, if this thing happens, then I'll keep going. And it was like the first Sunday I went, they were fundraising, and I was like, if they raise a certain amount of money, right, that's it, I'm here now. And they raised, like, it was 50 grand, I'd said to God, and they raised 52 with gift aid. And I remember saying, right, well, guess I'm staying.
Oh, that's so funny.
And I won't say what type of church it was, but again, the worship was really shiny, and just couldn't really connect with it. Really struggled, you know. So I was like, "This is an act of obedience, Lord." Um, and then my boyfriend at the time played me uh, "Holy." Now, just he introduced it by saying, "This vineyard, they're on the wane. The guy who leads them just died." And I was like, never heard of Vineyard, didn't have a clue. Anyway, he put the CD in, and I was just like, I don't know what to do with myself. And I remember I just playing it, like lying on the floor, just like playing it over and over and over again, and being like, I don't think I'd have used this language then, but now I would say this is what I've been looking for. It's
Mm.
like honesty in worship, you know, um, where you can hear the guts of a song and a person
Mm-hmm.
and production, and it doesn't feel like artifice in between, you
Mm-hmm.
know. So that was the beginnings of it, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, and over the years, I've had some amazing opportunities, led at conferences, um, like NLC and uh, retreats, all stuff way above my pay grade, really. And yeah, like Andrew and I were saying, even when we were skint, we would always go to the worship retreat, even though it was quite pricey, because something in us knew like that's incredibly important. So I was part of Reading Vineyard for years, 13 years, I think, 14 years, and led worship a lot, 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 2, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Andrew's a drummer as well as being a social worker, so he would always be behind me. And I'd always say to the band, if you don't know where you're going, just listen to the fill. Like when I was very tired, I'd be like, when the babies were small, right, that's where we're going. I recognise what he's doing there. So we've always been involved in it. And then a couple of years ago, Paul and Steph said, "Would you look after it?" Um, and then the pandemic. So it's been a wild ride, but in some ways, I felt like God was reminding me just the other day of how like he just gently like, Suze, this has always been you. This has always been in you, you know, because sometimes you can just think, who am I to be doing this, who am I to be making decisions about what we sing and what we don't sing and what this looks like and who's involved or not involved and all of that. Um, yeah, and he just gently, it was just a gentle like, come on, this has been a long time in the making, because it's so easy to just say, well, surely there's someone better, surely there's someone more qualified than me, you know. have qualifications, but no proper ones in worship. Just love God. So trying to do
Well,
an all right job of being a human,
I think that anyone that knows you and knew you before you were a worship pastor would say, she'd be a great worship pastor. So I remember being so excited the day that I found out that you were like officially, not just unofficially kind of leading worship, but that you were worship pastor. That just made me so happy. I think it is one of the things that you are definitely on this earth to do. Um, and I also appreciate the free plug for the worship retreat. So,
Oh,
on behalf of myself and the Vineyard Worship staff team, we are very grateful for your for your plug there. Everybody needs to come along to it, and that's probably where you and I met for the first time. Would have been at one of those at some point along the
yeah,
way.
it was when you were talking about timelines get hazy.
Mm-hmm.
You came and you spoke about intimacy, and I always remember you said you were signing off for maternity leave, and you'd got your teams all sorted, and you were feeling really pleased. It was all neat and tidy, and then God was like, And I remember thinking, I can imagine how terrible that was.
I love that you
Yeah.
remembered that so vividly.
I do, yeah, I really remember it. And it was
Mm,
quite a few years ago now, and I remember thinking, here's a
mm-hmm.
brave woman.
Yeah,
I think
when
we're going to get on.
you build a you build what you think is a nice shiny worship ministry, and then it all comes unraveled. That's a great a great experience. So I think what I would love to ask you is the question that I always ask, which is, what is worship? And given what everyone's just heard about you and your sharp mind and your teasing out of the
I'm
truth,
not that smart at all.
well, I think you are, and I would love for you to talk about what worship is, and then just keep going. Talk about some of the things that are important to you in worship that you have thought about because you have thought about them, that you've wrestled with in prayer,
Yeah.
that you have gone round and round, just trying to get to the heart of some of these things, trying to get to the bottom of what worship is, what it looks like. Just start talking. It's gonna be good.
Um, yeah, this is a bit cheeky because I was literally asking you this question like a year ago, like, Harmony, I've got all these questions, and you just like let me talk for an hour on the phone. But I think for loads of us, when the pandemic started and suddenly we were legally not allowed to sing together, we obviously could still sing at home. It did make you think, what is worship? Why do we do this mass karaoke of a Sunday morning? You know, what is it about? What is it for? And then in parallel, there was the stuff going on in America, the Let Us Worship protests, I guess. And it really disturbed me in my gut, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to wrestle it down. Um, and I think that's a bit how me and God do business. I get like uh, upset, at some level, and then we have to wrestle it through. So I was, yeah, reading my Bible, praying, thinking, listening to smart people, reading smart things. And it all started to come back together. Rich De Castiglione, who's an amazing guy, had posted some stuff on Instagram. And all of those verses around, you know, justice
Mm-hmm.
and what worship is. What is it? I desire. Is it I desire mercy, not sacrifice? If I got that wrong, and that was just brewing in my heart, and I couldn't quite figure it out. And sort of right, we are entering monologue territory. So I, and particularly someone who's always sung and always felt that worship was so incredibly important to me. I was just feeling really disturbed by it. And essentially, what I guess I went through and I thought about was loads of different things that led me to a really simple revelation, which is that we worship God because we should. You emailed me and you said, what is worship?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that popped into my head was like a right and proper response to who God is and what he's done for us.
Mm.
And yes, that is in how you bring up your children and what your marriage looks like and how you talk about colleagues behind their back and how you spend your money and what you do with your body. Yes, all of that. But it is also this thing of singing. And you can't escape it. It is throughout the Bible. It is there the whole way through. And I think what had been disturbing me is I was hearing people say, worship does this, worship is this, worship accomplishes this. And that was really making me uncomfortable. And I came to a very profound theology, which is this, wait for it. We don't know what worship does. And I am absolutely like 100% fine with that. Do I understand the mind of God? No. How on earth could I? Because he is God and I am not, So all of this like worship breaks strongholds and worship is, yeah, I am sure all of that stuff. But that isn't, for me, that's not the point of it. And the Vineyard Worship Instagram account put this quote up. Sorry, that's why I was looking at my phone, which I'd never heard before. This was just a couple of days ago. Worshipping God is an end, not a means. It is our highest value. And that's a John Wimber quote, which I'd never heard before. And I was just like, yes, 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 and amen. Something I keep on saying to my team is like, which is very small still at the moment, because in Manchester, we weren't legally allowed to be in the same room until July. So all the way from March 2020 till July 2021. So we are still building that team. And we only came back as a church 4 weeks ago and live stream. And oh my goodness, the technical issues and all of that. And there'll be someone listening who might email me and say you're completely wrong, and that's fine. Like, I'm fine with being wrong. But I think worship in the correct spirit looks like a waste of time, and money and energy, and it looks foolish to people. And I keep coming back. And I know it's obviously a story we look at a huge amount in worship, but the woman who broke the perfume at Jesus' feet, and they say, well, that's a waste, she could have sold the money for the poor. And I love that in that story, the woman is given so much value, but that wasn't her intent. She wasn't coming to do that thinking, oh, I'm going to be talked about for millennia. She wasn't thinking like that, It was just a profound response to the person of Jesus and who he was and who he is. And so she did something that looks foolish and risky and, could have made a fool of herself. And I think increasingly worship, looking at that story, worship should have beauty, it should have cost, there should be an element of sacrifice to the thing that we do, and it should be risky. There's a chance you could fall on your face and people think you're silly. And it should be wasteful.
Hmm.
We should waste ourselves. Have you wearied yourself for me?
Hmm.
Or rather, you have not wearied yourself for me, is something you find in Isaiah. And it's like, how much do we guard our lives and our time and our energy
Hmm.
so carefully, and measure out our bits of mint and dill, you know so all of that thinking through the summer when we couldn't sing, and essentially, I don't know what worship does, is a
Hmm.
truth I can sit very happily in, but I know we're meant to do it. So deeply profound, obviously.
No, it's really good. Well, if worship is an end in itself, that says it all, really. Um, so I think that you have drilled down on a number of things since when I last spoke to you. So actually, it's really fun to catch up with you now because you have just continued to journey this thing out. Because at the time when we talked about all of this, um, you were not sure about singing in the sense, I hope it's okay that I'm saying that, but you were putting that question out there. What is the point of this singing thing? Um, when there is all this other stuff in the likes of Amos and places about how God feels when our singing does not match our living, right?
Mhm.
So I can just see that you just went away and you did what you always do, which is you just drilled down and searched it out. You are a seeker of truth, and I love that. I just love that so much. And you've been a seeker of truth with worship and um, the things that you have drilled down on, for instance, in worship. So now we're talking maybe more about the expression of worship, the culture of contemporary worship, the industry of worship, some of the things that you've drilled down on, which I would love for you to chat about. And of course, the number one word, you know what I'm going to say, right? The word that I'm going to say is homogeneity. So, talk to us about that because you have done a lot of seeking on this issue as well.
Now, I should first say I'm a dairy farmer's daughter. So homogenization is something I know a little bit about. Um, Homogenization is the process when you process milk through which the fat doesn't rise to the top and is equally distributed, so that when you pour your semi-skimmed, it all comes out. The cream is the whole way through. Whereas grew up where the cream rose to the top, and then my dad would try and get it before mum started banging onto him about cholesterol. So homogenization is something that has particular resonance for me. Um, I mean, this is a conversation you and I have been having for years, but
Mm-hmm.
it seems unusual that the God of the universe has a worship that sounds so similar, and songs that sound so similar, you know, that someone who there's something like 30,000 types of beetle. Sometimes in your journey as a Christian, you come across something and you're like, there's definitely a God. I went to the Natural History Museum in Oxford and they have them very Victorian pinned on boards. And I just saw them all the colours of beetles, bright purple ones, bright green ones, polka dot beetles, and then we are on a Sunday the same sort of formula. And what I mean by that, because I can be specific, um, is words that talk about God being strong and powerful and not much else. Words that talk sort of fleetingly and in opaque terms about sort of trouble we're having. Songs that continue to paint a picture of a God who fixes things for us. And, you know, they can often have a dropped down verse, what I've heard called, or my husband calls, spooky voice. So you know the octave jump is coming. There's a big build on drums. It jumps up, and then whoa, hands in the air, and and all of that is okay if that is not all that you are singing. But you know, I haven't got the stat in front of me, so I won't quote it. But a lot of the songs we sing are written by a really narrow amount of people. And how did it get like that? Mm-hmm. I don't know, but potentially because, like an algorithm, you feed yourself on the thing you've already fed yourself on, you know. And even bringing algorithms into play, you watch one thing on YouTube, it'll say, do you want to watch this? It'll just autoplay you stuff into your brain. Mm-hmm. And you know, you've watched this, do you want to watch this by Elevation Worship, do you want to watch this? And I think we stopped thinking, partly. So I've many thoughts, but one thing is like, are we frightened of not singing popular songs, like of stepping away and looking at the diet of what we're singing and saying, you know, we're not going to actually do that. And the other thing is, I will say, what does that line mean? What does that mean? Like, why is that line there? What does it say? And obviously there's poetic expression and all the rest of it, but sometimes things are just placeholder, you know? And so can you sing a better song? You know, if you don't sing the mega hits or don't sing all of them, is there a better song? It might be a less well-known song. Oh dear, I'm off on one now. But can you sing a better song? Because constantly the way of Jesus is the first to last. There was nothing about him. There was nothing about him in the way he looked, you know. And yet we are drawn to big millions of views on YouTube. If it's successful, God must be blessing it. Really? Really? Is it that obvious an equation? You know, you think about the widow's mite. Is it that obvious an equation that something big and impressive means that God is blessing it? Not necessarily. So I'm really careful about what we sing at our church. I'm really careful. And obviously this is with Andrew, my husband, as well. So we can discuss things. So, you know, there's a robust chat that happens. But one of the things that I think is fascinating in worship, and I don't know if you've noticed this as well, very few songs now are pure adoration. And actually, this Sunday we had baptisms and we ended on wonderful Youre song. And we all sang together at the end, just a couple of times round. You are great and wonderful. Yes, you are. You know, and it was just such a moment of like, just, you know, just our voices singing, you are great and wonderful. You know, and in that moment, as much as I've just said, you don't know what happens in worship, you are freed of everything else for a bit, you know, and sitting in that truth and standing in that truth. So I will look at what we're singing and say, what aren't we singing? Because one of the things that's really concerned me is that worship's gotten shiny. And if you are in a mess, if you're in a hot mess, what can be the unconscious takeaways of some of the songs that we sing?
Mm.
Um,
Well,
you
what do
know,
you think some of those things are? What are the unconscious takeaways from our shiny worship sets, Suze?
well, you're never gonna let me down. Great, love that song.
Hmm.
Uh, what does that mean if you sing that and no one explains it to you? You know, so God's gonna set everything straight. You know, God's gonna get you winning. And there are some of this where these songs come from. That is part of their theology.
Hmm.
That you're on the winning team,
Hmm.
and of course we are on the winning team. But Jesus said, "In this world, you will have trouble." You know, one of the things I keep coming back to, and again, this is over the last year, Jesus's cousin's head got chopped off. While Jesus was a real, obviously embodied God, human, terrified of the comments underneath, while God was on the earth, you know, his own cousin
Hmm.
lost his head.
Hmm.
And Jesus was heartbroken about it.
Hmm.
So we can't accidentally preach a gospel through what we sing of everything will straighten out, which it will in the long run. So I think you have to be mindful of, does your church have songs that enable people whose life isn't up and to the right to come and be found? You know, so one of the songs I love is All the Same. And we sang it because of baptisms on Sunday. And it's like, you welcome the lover, the hater, believer, the doubter. My favourite line, the pure and profane.
That's a good line.
Written really well, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
because that's like saying in a song, this is who God is. This is the character of who God is. This is what he does. You know, you are welcome. We sung All Things Rise a lot through the pandemic, partly for all things once sown in weakness you raise in promise.
Hmm.
You know, one of our values at Vineyard is accessibility. And for me, that means we don't really sing any songs with octave jumps because they're not very accessible to people. Everyone's watching this going, don't want to win her team.
But everyone
And
that knows you expects you to talk about octave jumps, so you've mentioned it twice already.
well, they're just deeply uncongregational. You know,
Hmm.
I can't really do them. I get panicked if I've got to do them. I sang at a former member of our worship team's wedding, and there were three. And I was like, you're just getting me back, aren't you, for all those years? They're not bad songs, but they're not unbiblical. It's just people don't sing a lot, you know. So to ask them to do something that's actually really difficult, and you hear like people just going, you know. But also accessibility is also, can you come as you are?
Hmm.
You know, does this worship? Obviously, it is to God. It is an end of itself, but you can't ignore the fact that it involves people. So at the same time, you know, I think of it as laying a table. You know, people come to eat, and you've laid a table. And so if you're constantly singing songs where the sort of resolution of the song is God's gonna fix it because he's strong and powerful, well, that's only one thing, isn't it? And what if he doesn't? You know, so if you look at King of My Heart again, you're never going to let me down. Well, we know that we know that in all things, God works in all things. You know, that doesn't explain that. So if I lead that song, I always have the tag at the end, which is the when the night is holding on to me, um, God is holding on,
Mm-hmm.
because that then gives you the context. So if you don't, all you've got is, you're never going to let me down,
Mm-hmm.
which is not untrue, but is very open to, you know, being taken away as
Mm-hmm.
thinking
Mm-hmm.
everything's gonna, everything is gonna materially be well, or whatever. And then what happens when it isn't? You want songs that give people language for when it's hard, and when they feel like they can't come before God, because the, the magnificence of the gospel is that there is nothing that disqualifies us. So how terrifying if we accidentally present something that is a disqualifier for people. It's actually I'm just gonna find a very quick quote. One of the other things I just read, I'm really late to the party after saying, "Oh, I really got a brain." I just started reading C.S. Lewis. I got the bumper pack for my birthday this year, so I read Mere Christianity, and there's just a brilliant bit about your brain and bringing your brain with you. He told us not only to be as harmless as doves, but also as wise as serpents. He wants a child's heart, but a grown up's head. He wants us to be simple, single minded, affectionate, and teachable as good children are. But he also wants every bit of intelligence we have to be alert at its job and in first class fighting trim.
That's so
I
good.
love that.
So good.
And then he goes on to say the fact that you're giving money to a charity doesn't mean that you need not try to find out whether that charity is a fraud or not. The fact that what you are thinking about is God Himself. It doesn't mean that you can be content with the same babyish ideas of which you had when you were a 5-year-old. This is my favourite bit because this is his humour. It is, of course, quite true that God will not love you any the less or have less use for you if you happen to have been born with a very second-rate brain. He has room for people with very little sense, but He wants everyone to use what sense they have.
Oh, so good.
And I think that in worship, we've sometimes parked our brain, you know. That example of you give to a charity, you want to know what charity's doing with that. You sing a song, who's written it? What's
Mm.
going on in that church? What's their theology? Songs carry theology. And you're not going to argue with me on that one. So we sing quite a lot of Vineyard songs because they carry our theology. And for me, I ended up in a vineyard because the theology of the now and not yet was so important in holding me, And I was like, now I get it. It's all available, but it's all the tension, holding things in tension. So yeah, sorry, that's a really long answer, but it's
Great.
it's important, So I do look through what we're singing all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I would love to have some like more banging, four to the floor, super praise and adoration songs, but they're really hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, for me, I would say songs of adoration and songs that talk about what God is like, what Jesus is like, what the Holy Spirit is like, in specifics. Like if I was to tell you about Andrew, I'd say he's good. Like anyone who knows him knows he's a good man.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to ask me, well, what does that mean? Well, I'd say he always does what he says he's going to do.
Mm.
If you tell him something in confidence, that'll never leak out. He's an amazing cook. He's a really interested father. I could bang on and on about what he is like as a person, and that would start to build in your mind. He loves Man United and Star Wars, goes to the football, and then you'd have an idea of what he's like as a person. Whereas if I was to say, yeah, he's good, he's great, doesn't build an idea of his character.
Mm.
Yeah, so the songs we sing are important.
Yes, you've made a very strong case for that, Suze. And, do you have any practical tips for worship pastors, worship leaders that are like, I get what Suze is talking about, but actually, how do I work this out in practice in my song selection, in the lean in a certain direction?
um, I think the 5 phases of the heart model, which you can just Google and find, is probably been forgotten a little bit. I think that's really helpful. So gather, praise and adoration, response, reflection, inviting God to come. Are you doing that? Maybe not every Sunday, but is there some sort of arc of that? I've spoken to people who've been leading worship for so long, and they've not necessarily thinking how they put a set together, just picking some songs out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, just the same way you think about what you start a main and pudding's going to be, and we don't have to overcomplicate things. But I think if you start to think about it, I think it follows naturally.
Mm-hmm.
If you start to say, look at what you're singing and just ask what's missing. So for us, our church is involved in this massive, ridiculous project to take on an abandoned building for the community and get it reopened. And it's a huge part of what we're doing. And our pastor is currently speaking about outward focus, being an outward focused church. And I'm like, what songs have we got about that?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? There aren't many.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't many. And it's not to say you should match what the pastor is speaking about, although I think they'd love you to sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It just
Mm-hmm.
means you're pulling in the same direction. But God's really interested in the poor.
Mm-hmm.
The prophets are constantly coming through the Old Testament, and their refrain over and over is, you've forgotten the plight of the widow, you've forgotten the plight of the stranger. It's all very well doing your religious thing, but so we've not got many songs about that. So I think it's just starting to give yourself permission to critically analyze what you are singing.
Mm.
And also really helpful to look at the Psalms and what is in there, and then look at what you sing, and then look at the Psalms, and then look at what we sing, and just this refrain through Scripture to sing a new song. Well, if we're always singing other people's songs, then we don't sing our own song. I remember Adam Russell years ago at a worship retreat said, it's like your kid coming up to you with a picture when they're 4 and they come home from school and they've drawn this picture, and you give it to an art critic and it wouldn't be very good, but it's your kid and they've done it for you, and that's the posture we should have when the songs say coming out of our community. Where did the pressure come for them to be brilliant songs? What are we missing out on when we don't have an attempt at singing the songs that we're missing? Maybe look through what you've got and just go, what are we missing? That's how I normally, and then I'm like, bull. trying to sniff out where the song that has the thing that we need to sing is. And sometimes it's not anywhere because it is actually like you need to do it,
Mm.
or someone in your community needs to do it.
So a lot of effort goes in, and I think that can be a bit of a surprise sometimes, how much work goes into even finding a song that's already written, never mind writing one yourself. Like my
Yeah.
husband loves to joke with me and say, "Oh, how hard can it be stringing a couple of songs together?" But it is actually a lot harder than it looks to the outside observer. And I really respect and I hope that people catch from this conversation the amount of energy, effort, thought, brain, heart you put into finding songs and all the things that you consider as you do that. And I also hope that songwriters, there's been some little clues in here for songwriters. You looking for the gaps? Brian Dirksen talks about the gap. Where are the gaps in songwriting? You've given us a few, Sue. So to all the songwriters, write those songs, send them to us at Vineyard Worship. We would love to hear them. We do need to sing about mission. I
Mm,
wholeheartedly agree with that. On Sunday, we sang All Hail King Jesus, and repeating that line, the Savior of the world. And it was so powerful. And, we can't just take it for granted that everybody knows he's the Savior of the world. we need to be reminded he's the Savior of the world. It seems so simple, but he's the Savior of the world. And something definitely happened in the room when that truth was sung out and repeated, because we do like to repeat things in the vineyard, don't we? And things do happen. They are a bit mysterious. We don't always understand why, and you can definitely repeat too much. That definitely happens, but there's something about letting that truth sink in. He's the Savior of the world, and he is on mission, and this is an important time in the journey of the church. So worship pastors, worship leaders, I hope you've been inspired by Suze's quest for truth, her dissatisfaction with shiny worship, and the authenticity that you are chasing after, Suze. We so appreciate it. We love what you bring to us in our movement. We're so thankful for you. Do you have any parting comments to us, worship leaders?
Um, just a few. Just I think our nation needs it as much as I've just said. Like worship, I don't know what it does. The thing you just said. Something happened in the room. And I was really struck by. I was listening to the new Sam Fender album, which everybody is raving about and just saying, it's a brilliant album,
Mm.
and it articulates something of being. He's from like South Shield, um, from a messed up family and not a lot of money. And I was listening to the album, and I was like knocked off my feet a bit by it. And I was looking at this particular lyric, and he sings, "I'm godless and wrecked, but I can't live by those stakes. The semantics are totally outdated, and the love I had is never enough. It bores me and leaves me frustrated." And I was just like, something that we carry speaks to that. You know, in worship, it is to God and it is for Him, but also something that we do speaks into the heart of. There is nothing like the love of God. We are built for Him.
Mm.
We are built for Him. It is hardwired.
Mm.
If we do not sing, the rocks will cry out. It's hardwired into the heart of every person. And I think we need to be braver in the songs that we write and sing. And I think we need to be more honest, if we can be, Because I think if someone brand new to faith and no prior knowledge comes in, they don't know if you're singing Bethel Hillsong. They've no idea. They've never heard any of it before, but they'll catch your heart. They'll
Mm.
catch if it's authentic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that
Mm-hmm.
they'll catch if you mean it, and
Mm.
they'll catch what's happening in the room. And I think um, I do believe that worship could change a nation. I do.
Mm.
I do. I don't know how it works, but I do believe that we're built for it, and that through the pandemic, things have been deformed in us,
Mm.
and then we have been formed by other things. So I think we've become more selfish, more frightened, less community minded,
Mm.
and all of that. And I think one of the things that happens in worship is we get reformed.
Mm-hmm.
We get reminded of who God is and what He's about and how we are held, and we don't have to do it all. And it's not about whether you're on the left or the right, or you don't have to have the right ideas. You don't have to do it yourself, you know? So I think, imagine like a generation of really honest songwriters, and they might be only sung in your church, but that's not only, you know, they might only be sung between you and God, but that will set your own heart on fire.
Mm.
and and He loves it, you know. He loves it when we are whole, you know, wholehearted,
Mm.
um, before Him. So, you know, you can't think of it as too high a calling, really. And I'm always surprised when I've been brave and put like something in me leading worship, you know, on a social media or whatever. I'll have people come up to me and say, I just started crying and I don't know why. I think I was just tired. I was like, yeah, probably just, you know.
Mm.
I've led worship in prisons a few times, and I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. I am like this tall, and they're all enormous, and like all blokes, and they don't know the songs. And then the Lord comes, and you're like, ah. So worship is for God, and that's enough.
Mm.
But we don't know what else is happening. Um, then it's worth our time and our energy. And I'm speaking as much to myself because I know there are songs that I haven't written
Mm.
because Instagram is quite appealing, or I need to do the washing up, you know. And it feels like a waste sometimes. It feels like it's not a productive thing to do. But nothing that is beautiful has its first purpose in utility.
Mm.
I think that made sense.
That's
So anyway,
amazing. Yeah, so, so good. And thank you for that challenge to keep seeking to bring our brains to worship. And yeah, I think sometimes as worship leaders, we can feel like what people want from us is the karaoke. You know, are we allowed to actually have opinions? Are we allowed to write songs and express our own journey with the Lord? And obviously, you need to work that out in relationship with your local community. But I really don't think that we as worship leaders are supposed to just be performing monkeys and switch our brains off and do karaoke. We were made for more than that. And from chatting to you, Suze, you're a great example of someone who is not afraid to search out the truth and to ask hard questions, to really think deeply. And you really love Jesus. And I'm so glad that we are friends and that you're part of this crazy vineyard family. So I hope this conversation has been as fun for you as it's been for me. Thank you, everybody, for listening, for being part of this as well. Thank you, Suze.
thank you for asking me. It's a total privilege.
My pleasure. See you soon.